The signal came in at 3:14 in the morning. Nobody was ready for it. Nobody could have been. Commander Yara Osei was sitting alone in the monitoring room at Earth's Deep Space Relay Station, located in the cold hills outside Nairobi. She had a half-empty cup of coffee beside her keyboard and a report open on her second screen that she had been trying to finish for the past 2 hours. It was a quiet night. It was always a quiet night out there. That was the job. Sit, watch, listen to the dark. Then the dark spoke back. The signal hit the receiver array like a stone dropped in still water. The computers flagged it immediately. Fragmented, looping, heavily degraded from long-distance travel. Yara leaned forward in her chair. Her coffee went cold and stayed that way. She put on her headset and began to filter the noise. It took her 40 minutes to clean the signal enough to understand it. When she finally did, she sat completely still for a long time. It was a voice. A woman's voice. She was speaking in standard colonial English, the language used across all 12 of Earth's outer colony systems. Her voice was calm, in the way that people become calm when they have moved past fear and arrived somewhere much worse. She was reading names. Hundreds of them. She spoke each one clearly, carefully, like she wanted to make sure every single one was heard. Then the voice stopped reading names and said something else. She said that the Vorn hegemony had come to the Callisto colony 3 weeks ago. She said they came with a fleet of warships that blocked out the stars. She said they broadcast a message on all frequencies, a legal document filed under something called the Galactic Territory Ordinance, which stated that humanity's outer colonies had been built inside sovereign stellar territory without a permit. She said the document was 1,200 pages long. She said nobody on the colony had ever heard of this ordinance before. She said they were given no time to respond. She said the bombardment began 6 hours after the document was delivered. She said she was transmitting from an underground shelter and that the shelter was running out of power. She said the same thing had happened to all 12 colony systems. She had confirmation from relay beacons on 7 of them. The other 5 had gone silent. She said she did not think the silence meant anything good. Then she read more names. Then the signal looped back to the beginning. Yara pulled off her headset and placed it on the desk very slowly. She looked at her hands for a moment. Then she picked up the secure line and called her director. Her director called the UEDD. The UEDD called the Secretary General's office. By 5 a.m., the lights were on in the council building in Geneva, and nobody in that building was talking above a whisper. Secretary General Darius Mwangi was a tall man with gray at his temples and tired eyes that had seen most of what the world could offer. He had been in politics for 30 years. He had handled disasters, wars, food shortages, and 3 separate first contact scares that the public never found out about. He was not a man who frightened easily. He was not a man who cried in front of others. He read the full report standing up at the head of the council table because he had not sat down since they handed it to him. The room had 20 people in it. Senior officials, military advisors, 2 intelligence directors. All of them had already read it. All of them were waiting to see what the Secretary General would say. He reached the last page. He read the final number. 10,240,600,011. That was the estimated total. The analysts had put a note beneath it saying the real number might be higher because several colony population databases were now unrecoverable. He put the report face down on the table. He looked at the wall in front of him for a moment. Then he said, quietly, "Then they have never met us before." Nobody in the room said anything. He turned to face them. His voice was steady. His face was steady. But his eyes had changed in a way that everyone in the room would remember for the rest of their lives. Something had settled in them. Something that had no interest in being talked out of itself. He asked for a vote. It was the fastest vote in the history of the United Earth Council. Every hand went up at the same time, without hesitation, without discussion. There was nothing to discuss. Some things do not need debate. Some things are simply true. Protocol Epsilon is initiated, he said, effective immediately. Across the planet, and across the solar system, machines began to wake up. In the Atacama Desert in Chile, a set of underground blast doors slid open for the first time in 11 years. In the shipyard, buried inside the dark side of Titan, automated systems powered on and began their startup sequences, filling cold corridors with light and noise. In the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, 17 separate construction stations received the activation code at the same time and immediately resumed work on ships that had been sitting half-finished and waiting for exactly this moment. Most people on Earth did not know about any of this. But not yet. Right now, it was still just a quiet morning in Geneva. The sun was coming up over the lake. Birds were starting to make noise in the trees outside the council building. The world outside looked exactly the same as it always did. Inside, Darius Mwangi dismissed everyone except his chief of defense, a short and serious woman named General Hana Cho. He asked her one question. He asked her if they were ready. She told him they had been ready for 15 years. They had simply been waiting for the order. He nodded. He told her to begin. She left the room. He walked to the window and looked at the lake. The water was flat and gray in the early morning light. Somewhere out there, 40 light-years away, a woman's voice was still looping in the dark, reading names into empty space. Names of people who had been alive 3 weeks ago. Names of children who had never done anything to anybody. He stayed at the window for a long time. Then he turned away from it and got back to work. Because grief in a man like Darius Mwangi did not stay grief for long. It became something else. Something patient. Something cold. Something that knew exactly what it was doing and was in absolutely no hurry because it planned to be very, very thorough. Somewhere under the ice of Titan, a 4-kilometer warship switched on its engines for the first time. Its name, painted in large white letters across its hull, was ESV Reckoning. The Galactic Empire had existed for 40,000 years. That was not a number most humans could truly understand. 40,000 years ago, humans were living in caves and painting animals on stone walls. The Vorn hegemony, which was the military and political heart of the empire, had already been sailing between stars for longer than human civilization had existed. They had crushed 30 species that tried to resist them. They had absorbed 200 more without a fight. They had cataloged, filed, and forgotten more civilizations than Earth had countries. They had a file on humanity. It was very thin. The file said that humans were a Tier 3 primitive species, single star, single planet, with 2 small inhabited moons and a handful of research outposts. Faster-than-light travel by all available intelligence. No standing military worth noting. Biological lifespan short, emotional and unstable. Prone to fighting each other. Low threat assessment. The file had last been updated 41 years ago by a hegemony survey drone that passed through the outer edge of the Sol system and detected no unusual activity. The file was, in almost every way that mattered, completely wrong. Dr. Celine Park had not slept in 31 hours when the activation code arrived on her secure terminal. She was in her office, deep inside Research Station Kappa, which was buried 2 kilometers beneath the surface of Titan, Saturn's largest moon. It was cold there, even with the heating systems running. It was always cold. She had worked there for 19 years, and she had never quite gotten used to the cold. But she had gotten used to everything else. The isolation, the secrecy, the weight of knowing what was being built around her, and understanding that the moment it was used, the world would never be the same. She read the activation code twice. Then she picked up the intercom. "This is Dr. Park. All department heads to the main floor. Authorization Epsilon, right now." She did not need to explain further. Every person in that station had been hired, knowing that one day those two words would come. They had trained for it, they had prepared for it. Some of them had quietly hoped it would never come. None of them were surprised that it had. She took the elevator down to the main floor and walked out onto a platform that overlooked a space large enough to hold 6 football stadiums stacked on top of each other. The lights were coming on section by section as the automated systems woke up. And there, in the growing light, sitting in its cradle like something from a dream, was the ship. It was 4 kilometers long. Its hull was dark, almost black, made from a composite material that absorbed radar and sensor signals, the way black cloth absorbs light. Its engines were unlike anything in any public database. They were built around a principle that Earth's physicists had quietly cracked 22 years ago, using salvaged components from a crashed alien vessel found in the Mongolian desert. Components that the public had never been told about, that had been studied in secret for decades before anyone understood what they were looking at. The ship was named ESV Reckoning. It was the first of its class. It was not the largest thing in the station. Celine walked to the railing and looked at it for a long moment. Her chief engineer, a broad-shouldered man named Torres, came to stand beside her. "She's ready?" Celine asked. "Been ready for 3 years," Torres said. "We were just waiting on you." The Reckoning was not alone, not even close. 7 stations like Kappa existed across the solar system. One was inside a hollowed-out asteroid, in the belt between Mars and Jupiter. One was in the permanent shadow of Earth's moon, hidden under 200 meters of rock and shielding panels that looked like natural crater formations from orbit. One was in the deep atmosphere of Neptune, kept aloft by systems so advanced they had no public name yet. Each station had been built slowly, quietly, over the course of 30 years. Construction materials were moved in small amounts on ships that were logged as mining transports. Workers were hired on 10-year contracts with full communication blackouts. Families were told their loved ones were working on deep space infrastructure. It was not entirely a lie. In total, across all 7 stations, there were 241 ships of the same class as the Reckoning. There were also 600 smaller vessels, faster, lighter, built for different purposes. There were weapons platforms disguised as asteroid mining rigs. There were relay and communication systems so deeply encrypted that the hegemony's best AI could not have broken them in 100 years. None of it had happened by accident. 40 years ago, after humanity's first confirmed detection of alien signals, a small and very serious group of people inside Earth's defense establishment had sat down and asked themselves a question that most governments did not want to ask. The question was simple. It was this: what happens if we meet something out there that does not wish us well? Most political leaders at the time wanted to believe the answer was diplomacy, trade, mutual understanding, the sharing of knowledge between civilizations. The small and serious group did not disagree with any of that. They simply believed in having a second answer ready, in case the first one did not work. They called the second answer Protocol Epsilon. They began building it the following year. On the 3rd day after the vote in Geneva, Secretary General Mwangi made a decision that his communications team argued against loudly and at length. He decided to tell the hegemony exactly what was coming, not in detail, not with specifications or fleet numbers, just a single message translated by Earth's linguistic AI into every registered galactic language, loaded into a diplomatic courier drone, and fired toward the nearest hegemony administrative station at the edge of the outer colonies. The message was short. It said that the Vorn hegemony had committed genocide against 10 billion citizens of Earth. It said that Earth was formally requesting the presentation of hegemony leadership for criminal tribunal. It gave them 7 days. It did not use words like please or we hope or we respectfully ask. It was written the way a bill is written. Simple, clear, with a due date at the bottom. The communications team said it would provoke them. Wang said that was the point. General Hana Cho, standing in the corner of the room with her arms folded, said nothing. She just nodded once, very slightly. The drone was launched at noon on a Tuesday. The hegemony received it 4 days later. Their translators read it 3 times because they were certain something had been lost in translation. Then a senior official laughed. Then several more officials laughed. Then someone forwarded it to the imperial court as an example of primitive species behavior, and people laughed there too. Nobody ordered a censor sweep of the Sol system. Nobody updated the file. That was their first mistake. It was not their last. But it was the one that would cost them the most, because while they were laughing, 241 warships were finishing their startup sequences in the dark. And at the front of the fleet, on the bridge of the ESV Reckoning, a woman named Lieutenant General Amara Voss was reading the same 7-day message on her screen and quietly calculating exactly how much time she had left to get into position. She had enough. The hegemony fleet came in confident. 400 warships dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system, in a formation so perfectly arranged it looked like a painting. Their hulls were gold and dark red, the official colors of the Vorn hegemony, polished to a shine that caught the distant light of the sun. Their flagship, the Eternal Dominion, was nearly 3 kilometers long and had never lost a battle in 90 years of service. Their admiral was a decorated veteran named Vorn Commander Dressel, a tall alien with gray skin and 4 arms, who had personally overseen the orbital bombardment of 2 civilizations in his career and had received medals for both. He stood on the bridge of the Eternal Dominion and looked at his sensor readings. There was nothing there. No fleet, no defensive line, no response on any communication channel. Just the quiet of open space and the faint light of a small yellow star a long way ahead. He turned to his sensor officer and asked if the readings were correct. The sensor officer said yes. The Sol system appeared to be undefended. Dressel clasped 2 of his 4 hands behind his back and allowed himself a small smile. He had told the imperial court that this would be simple. A primitive species playing at war with a message they should never have sent. He would reduce their planet to glass inside a week and be home before the month was out. He gave the order to advance. The fleet moved forward. They crossed into the outer solar system in clean formation. Engines burning steady, weapon systems on standby but not active. There was no reason to be on full alert. There was nothing here. That was when Lieutenant General Amara Voss spoke one single word into her headset. She said, "Now." Amara Voss was not an impressive-looking person at first glance. She was average height, with close-cut hair going gray at the sides, and small dark eyes that moved slowly and missed nothing. She had spent 30 years in Earth's defense forces. She had studied every military engagement in recorded human history. She had also spent the last 8 years studying every piece of intelligence Earth had on hegemony battle tactics, hegemony fleet formations, hegemony communication patterns, and hegemony command psychology. She knew exactly how they fought. They fought in straight lines. They advanced in formation. They communicated through a central command ship. They followed a battle protocol that was 6,000 years old and had worked against every enemy they had ever faced, because every enemy they had ever faced had done more or less the same thing back at them. Voss had no intention of doing the same thing back at them. The moment she said now, 40 of her smaller, faster ships, which had been sitting completely powered down, drifting among a field of genuine asteroids at the edge of the belt, activated their engines simultaneously, and came at the hegemony fleet from 3 different directions at once. Not to fight, to split their attention. At the same time, the main Earth fleet, which had been positioned behind the shadow of Jupiter, began to move. Not toward the enemy in a straight line, in a wide curve, quiet, patient, like a hand reaching around a corner. Dressel saw the 40 small ships and reacted the way his training told him to react. He split his fleet into 3 response groups and moved to engage. His formation broke cleanly into thirds, exactly as hegemony doctrine said it should. Voss had been counting on that. The moment the hegemony formation split, the 40 small ships did something no hegemony commander had ever seen an enemy do in the middle of a battle. They ran. They turned around and retreated at full speed, pulling 2 of the 3 hegemony response groups after them. Deeper into the asteroid belt, away from the main fleet, into a space that was very cluttered and very dark, and had been seeded, 3 weeks earlier, with automated weapons platforms disguised as rocks. The asteroid belt lit up like a city at night. Dressel realized what was happening 11 minutes after Voss said now. He was a good commander. He recognized the trap the moment the weapons platforms opened fire. He immediately began broadcasting recall orders to his 2 response groups and tried to pull them back. His recall orders were jammed. Earth's communication warfare systems had been running quietly in the background since the moment the hegemony fleet arrived, learning the exact frequencies and encryption patterns of their internal communications. By the time Dressel tried to use them, those channels belonged to Voss. What his response groups heard instead of recall orders was silence. And then, on a frequency that sounded almost identical to their own command channel, they heard a calm human voice telling them in perfect Vorn dialect that their flagship had been destroyed, and that all surviving ships should hold position and await boarding. It was not true. But it did not need to be true. It only needed to be believed for about 4 minutes. 4 minutes was enough. The main Earth fleet came around Jupiter's shadow and hit the remaining third of the hegemony fleet, the group that had stayed with Dressel from the flank at full speed. The hegemony ships were fast, but they had been designed to fight enemies who came at them from the front. Their armor, their weapons, their shield configurations, all of it was built for head-on engagement. Attacks from the side at close range were not something their designers had planned for, because no enemy had ever been willing to get that close. Humans were willing to get that close. The battle lasted 2 hours and 19 minutes. By the end of it, 260 hegemony ships had been disabled. Their weapons were dead, their engines were locked, and their life support was untouched. The remaining 140 ships had surrendered. Not a single one had been destroyed. That was not an accident. Voss gave very specific orders about what happened next. Every hegemony crew was to be removed from their ships carefully. Any injured were to receive medical treatment immediately, using hegemony-compatible supplies that Earth's medical teams had prepared in advance. Everyone was to be treated with basic dignity. Nobody was to be harmed. Then they were given back their fastest surviving ship. All of them, every crew member, every officer, Dressel included, were put on that ship together. Food, water, a working navigation system, and enough fuel to reach the nearest hegemony station. And a recording. The recording was of Voss herself, sitting in a plain chair on the bridge of the ESV Reckoning, speaking directly into the camera. She was not angry. She was not triumphant. She looked like a person finishing a task they had already thought through completely. She said that this had been Earth's opening move. She said that everything used in this battle had been built specifically to fight the hegemony's known tactics. She said that humanity had been studying them for a long time. She said that if the Empire wished to continue, Earth would be ready. Then she said something that Dressel would think about for the rest of his life. She said she hoped they chose not to continue. She said it the way someone says something they mean, but do not expect to be listened to. She was right. Back across the galaxy, in places far from the Empire, alien civilizations were quietly intercepting the battle recordings. They were watching them in small rooms with the doors closed, passing them from hand to hand, saying very little. But their eyes said something. For the first time in a long time, those eyes had something in them that looked very much like hope. Emperor Kale the 13th had not left his throne room in 4 days. He sat at the center of a circular chamber so large that the far walls were lost in shadow. The ceiling was made of clear crystal, and through it, on clear nights, you could see the stars of the home system. Tonight, he was not looking at the stars. He was looking at a holographic display that floated in front of him, showing him the battle recording from the Sol system for the 11th time. He watched the hegemony fleet split apart. He watched the trap close. He watched 260 of his warships go dark in just over 2 hours. He watched his decorated, experienced, highly paid admiral get put on a shuttle with a meal pack and sent home like a child returned after getting lost in a market. He sat back in his throne. The room was full of generals and advisors, all of them standing very straight and very quiet, because they had learned a long time ago that the emperor's silence was more dangerous than his voice. He had executed 3 advisors in his reign for speaking at the wrong moment. Nobody wanted to be the 4th. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Send the Grand Armada." The room stirred. The Grand Armada had not been deployed in 6,000 years. It was not a fleet that got used for ordinary problems. It was the Empire's final answer. 3,000 warships, the best crews in the hegemony, weapon systems that had never been tested in real combat, because nothing had ever survived long enough to test them against. It was the kind of force you sent when you wanted something to stop existing. One of the generals, a brave or perhaps very foolish one, quietly pointed out that deploying the Grand Armada would leave the Imperial home systems with almost no military protection for the months it would take to travel to Sol and back. The Emperor looked at him. The general did not speak again. The deployment order was filed within the hour. But Kale the 13th had not survived 40 years on the imperial throne by being only one thing at a time. While his left hand sent the armada, his right hand reached for something quieter. 3 days after the deployment order, a small, unmarked ship left the imperial home system on a course that was not logged in any official record. On board was a single diplomat. His name was Serath Vel, and he was one of the most experienced negotiators in the hegemony's service. He was tall, with long limbs and pale blue skin, and he had spent 60 years making deals in rooms where everyone wanted to kill each other. He was very good at his job. His instructions were simple: go to Earth, find the human leadership, offer them everything they could reasonably want. Make the problem go away before the galaxy decided to pay too much attention to it. Serath Vel arrived at Earth's orbital station 12 days later, flying a diplomatic frequency that Earth's defense network recognized as legitimate. He was escorted down to Geneva without incident. He was given a room, a meal, and 8 hours of rest. He was treated politely. The humans, he noted, were very polite people. It made him feel cautiously optimistic. Then, he was taken to meet Darius Mwangi. The meeting room was plain. A long table, chairs on both sides, windows that looked out over the lake. No decorations, no flags, no ceremony. Mwangi was already seated when Serath Vel was brought in. He stood briefly to acknowledge the diplomat, gestured to the chair across from him, and sat back down. Sereth Vel had met the leaders of 17 different species in his career. Most of them, when faced with the full weight of imperial attention, carried a particular look. It was a look somewhere between fear and the effort of hiding fear. It was a very recognizable look. He had learned to use it, to speak into that small space of anxiety and fill it with reasonable-sounding exits. Mwangi did not have that look. He had the look of a man who had already decided something and was now simply waiting for the current moment to finish, so he could get back to doing it. Sereth Vel delivered his offer carefully and professionally. Full recognition of humanity as a Tier 1 protected species. Seats on the Imperial Advisory Council. Trade access to 300 star systems. All colonial territory returned and legally registered. And most importantly, an official imperial statement classifying the destruction of the 12 colonies as an administrative error, a miscommunication between departments, deeply regrettable, never to be repeated. He finished speaking. He folded his long hands on the table and waited. Mwangi did not answer immediately. He reached down beside his chair and lifted something onto the table. Then he lifted another one, then another. He kept going until the table between them was covered and stacked high with printed pages, bound in plain gray folders, piled so tall that Sereth Vel had to lean sideways to see Mwangi's face past them. "Those are names," Mwangi said simply. 10,240,000,000 and change. Every one we were able to recover from the colony databases before they went offline. Men, women, children. People who were working, sleeping, raising families, living their lives. Gone in 6 hours because someone in your government filed the wrong paperwork and nobody checked. Sereth Vel looked at the stacks of names. He said nothing. "You are offering me safety," Mwangi said. "You are offering me a seat at a table built by the people who killed my citizens, so that I can sit next to them and call it peace." He paused. "I am going to tell you something, and I want you to carry it back to your emperor, word for word." He leaned forward slightly. "We are not fighting to survive. We are fighting so that this," he placed one hand flat on the nearest stack of pages, "has a consequence. A real one. One that the galaxy can see and remember. You can offer us safety. You cannot give us back what was taken. So keep the safety. We will take the consequence instead." Sereth Vel was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked, very carefully, if Mwangi understood what the Emperor was sending toward his system. Mwangi said he did. Sereth Vel asked if that did not frighten him. Mwangi looked at the stacks of names on the table. He said, "Ask them if they were frightened." Sereth Vel left Earth the same evening. He sat alone in the back of his ship for most of the journey home. He was a man who had seen a great deal. He had spoken to the leaders of civilizations on the edge of extinction and watched them bargain desperately for one more year, one more compromise, one more chance. He knew the shape of defeat in a person's face. What he had seen in Mwangi's face was not defeat. It was not defiance either, exactly. It was something calmer and more serious than either of those things. It was the face of someone carrying something heavy and choosing, very deliberately, not to put it down. He filed his report honestly. He wrote that the offer had been refused. He wrote that the human leadership showed no fear of the Grand Armada. He wrote that in his professional opinion, they were not performing courage, they actually had it. He added a personal note at the bottom, which he knew the Emperor would not like. It said that in 60 years of service, he had never sat across from a civilization that valued meaning over survival. He said he did not know what to do with that. He said perhaps no one did. Meanwhile, in dozens of systems across the galaxy, far from imperial space, alien governments that had spent generations keeping their heads down and their mouths shut were watching. They were watching the battle recordings. They were watching the meeting transcripts that had been quietly leaked by sources nobody could identify. they were watching a small species on a single planet stand in front of the largest military force in known history and refuse to move. 3 of them had already sent quiet messages to Geneva. More were writing theirs. The Grand Armada arrived at the edge of the Sol system on a Tuesday morning. 3,000 warships, the largest military force ever assembled in the history of the Vorn hegemony. Their formation stretched across space so wide that from a distance it looked less like a fleet and more like a wall. Their combined engine output was bright enough to detect from the surface of Earth with the naked eye, if you knew where to look. Several people did look. They stood in fields and on rooftops in the early morning dark and watched that slow, distant light moving toward them. And most of them were quiet in the way that people go quiet when something very large and very serious is finally arriving after a long wait. On board the ESV Reckoning, Lieutenant General Amara Voss drank her coffee, read the sensor report, and then set the cup down and began giving orders. She did not look frightened. Her crew did not look frightened. They had known this was coming. They had been told from the first day of training that Protocol Epsilon was not a plan for winning an easy fight. It was a plan for making the hardest possible fight winnable. There was a difference, and every person on every Earthship understood it clearly. The fleet moved out to meet the Armada. What happened next happened in 3 parts, and they happened at the same time. The first part was the battle the Armada could see. The Earth fleet came forward to engage. 241 warships against 3,000. On paper, it looked like a short fight with an obvious ending. The hegemony commanders thought so too. They had studied the battle recordings from the first engagement. They had made adjustments. They had new formations, new counter-tactics, new communication encryption that they believed could not be jammed. They were not entirely wrong. This fight was harder than the first one. Earth's ships took damage. Several smaller vessels were disabled in the opening exchange. The Reckoning herself took 3 direct hits in the first hour that shook her from bow to stern and knocked out power on 2 decks. Voss did not panic. She adjusted. She pulled ships back where she had to and pushed forward where she could. She used the same core principle she always used, the one she had learned from 30 years of studying how humans had always fought when they were outnumbered. She did not try to win every exchange. She tried to make sure that every loss cost the enemy more than it cost her. She traded space for damage. She gave ground and took engines. She retreated on the left and destroyed command ships on the right. The Armada was large and powerful and very well trained, but it was fighting an enemy that had built its entire fleet specifically to fight the Armada's known methods. Every weakness mapped, every blind spot studied. Every habit and pattern and assumption catalogued over years and years of careful intelligence work. Voss held the line. Against 3,000 ships, she held the line. The second part was the fight the Armada could not see. 3 weeks before the Armada arrived, 20 small Earthships had traveled to the outer edge of the Sol system by a different route. They carried no weapons. They carried teams of very specific people, small, trained, quiet individuals who had spent years preparing for exactly this assignment. They docked, silently and without any broadcast signal, against the outer hulls of asteroids near the Armada's projected arrival coordinates. When the Grand Armada dropped out of faster-than-light travel, those teams were already waiting, and in the confusion of a large fleet deploying into battle formation, 20 small ships, moving slowly among genuine rocks and debris, were invisible. They moved to pre-assigned positions. They matched the rotation and drift of specific hegemony vessels so precisely that no sensor suite picked them up as anything other than background noise. Then their teams went to work on the outside of those vessels, cutting, bypassing, installing small devices in places that no design blueprint had ever marked as vulnerable, because no enemy had ever been close enough to reach them. 4 hours into the main battle, 31 hegemony warships went dark simultaneously. Not destroyed, just dark. Engines offline, weapons offline, life support running, but nothing else. From the inside, every crew on those 31 ships experienced what felt like a total power failure of unknown origin. From the outside, those ships simply stopped participating in the battle. 20 minutes later, it happened again. Different ships, same result. The Armada's commanders could not explain it. They ran diagnostics. They found nothing. The ships had simply stopped, from the inside, for no visible reason. Fear is a strange thing in a battle. It is manageable when it has a shape. When it has no shape, when ships just go silent for no reason anyone can find, it spreads faster than any weapon. The Armada's formation began to loosen. The third part was the one nobody outside of the highest levels of Earth's Defense Command had known about at all. For 30 years, the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter had been used for mining. Everyone knew that. Hundreds of automated and semi-automated platforms operated out there, cutting rock, processing ore, sending cargo ships back and forth. It was boring, routine, industrial work. The hegemony's original survey drone had noted it, and classified it as primitive resource extraction. What the drone had not detected, because it had not been looking, and would not have understood what it was seeing if it had, was that 17 of those platforms were not mining rigs. They were gravitational lances, each one built over a decade, assembled piece by piece under cover of routine maintenance schedules, disguised by ore processing equipment bolted around their outer casings. Each one connected to the others by a buried cyber network running through the rock of the belt itself. Each one aimed at the specific gravitational coordinates that any fleet traveling from hegemony space to Sol would have to use as faster-than-light routing points. When Voss gave the order, all 17 activated at the same time. The routing lanes collapsed. Every calculated exit point for FTL travel within the Sol system folded inward on themselves and became unusable. The Armada's navigation systems began throwing warnings that had no resolution. 3,000 warships, in the middle of an already difficult battle, suddenly had no way out. They could fight, they could surrender. That was all. Emperor Kale XIII watched the battle feed cut out one section at a time. He sat alone in his throne room, in the dark, and he watched his Grand Armada, 6,000 years old, never defeated, never even seriously tested, come apart in real time against a species that had not existed in any meaningful hegemony record 3 months ago. He waited until the feed showed his fleet commanders broadcasting surrender signals on all frequencies. Then, he picked up the direct line to his communications minister and said 2 words. He said, "Call them." The ceasefire was agreed within 6 hours. The tribunal was announced 3 days later. It would be held on Earth, in Geneva, in the same building where the council had voted unanimously and every hand had gone up at the same time. It would be broadcast on every open galactic frequency. It would include representatives from 11 non-hegemony civilizations who had quietly offered their support to Earth during the conflict, and who now stepped forward, carefully and with great nervousness, into the light. The architects of the genocide came to Geneva one by one. Admirals, ministers, bureaucrats who had stamped the paperwork. The Emperor himself, traveling under ceasefire protection, who sat in a chair in a plain room and answered questions from a panel of judges that included 2 humans, 1 Vorn defector, and representatives from 3 of the species that had once been crushed by the hegemony and never forgotten it. Nobody was executed. That had been a firm condition for Mwangi from the beginning. They were tried, by evidence, by law, by a process that was slow and careful and open for everyone to watch. because humanity had not fought this war to become the new empire. They had not wanted a throne. They had not wanted territory or power or the fear of 1,000 species. They had wanted a consequence. They got one. Commander Yara Osei came to the memorial on a quiet morning in late autumn. It had been built on Luna, on a wide flat plain where the surface had been cleared and smoothed. The names were carved into long black walls that curved in a wide arc, visible against the gray of the lunar rock. 10,240,600,011 names, each one the same size as every other, no name larger or smaller than any other. Just names, running in lines, going on and on further than the eye can follow. She found the first name on the first wall. She read it aloud, quietly, to herself and to the silence around her. Then the third. She was going to be there a long time. She knew that. She had brought water and a folded blanket, and she did not plan to leave until she had to. Behind her, across the solar system, the shipyards were still lit. They had not gone dark. They would not be going dark for a very long time, because humanity remembered now, fully, completely, in the way that a species remembers when the cost of forgetting has already been paid in the worst possible currency. And somewhere far across the galaxy, in small rooms with closed doors, in the quiet spaces between stars, where tired and frightened civilizations had spent generations keeping their heads down, something was changing. Slowly, carefully, the way things always change when people who have been afraid for a very long time finally see someone stand in front of the largest thing in the room and refuse to move.